Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Welcome, my friends, to another super exciting and hopefully value-driven episode of the Modern Leadership Podcast. I am excited to be with you today. As I state, it's almost become like a broken record every week. I just love doing this podcast. We have so much fun. And today we're going to be sitting down with a serial connector and energy leader, Mr. Steve Robertson. Now, Steve is the CEO of Julian Krinsky Camps and Programs, which is an organization specializing in youth to adult programming that turns curiosity into passion and skill. And we're going to jump into that, and you're really going to enjoy what some of this is. What started out as a weekly tennis camp quickly grew to include golf, cooking, business, fitness, academics, and so much more. Steve has been with the company for 18 years. In this role, his primary responsibility is to cultivate a culture that results in memories lasting a lifetime. It probably goes without saying, but Steve is an expert on youth development and education, as well as understanding and adapting to youth. It is so great to welcome Steve Robertson on the Modern Leadership Podcast. Steve, how are you?
Jake, thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful introduction. Did you write that? Because I want to use that in future. That was wonderful. I feel fantastic after hearing that about myself.
Well, you and I, we kind of co-wrote it together. I took some of the stuff you sent over and I added a little flavor myself of some of the stuff I saw on the website. And I got to tell you, this topic, and don't let me get too deep into this just yet because I want to find out how you're doing. But this topic of youth development and turning passions into skills and really what the Julian Krinsky camps are doing is so fascinating to me. I can't wait to talk about it. But before we go there, did I miss anything in the intro? Anything about your personal life you'd like to share?
Well, thank you. We could always add more. My wife and I and our family make our home in Philadelphia. We've been here in the Philadelphia area for just over 18 years now, and we moved 18 years ago from South Africa, which we called home at the time. And so this is where we make our home. I'm definitely an enthusiast of everything. I'm definitely an entrepreneur and very passionate about everything I get involved with, and really fortunate to be in the space where we deal with the generations, the Z's and the Y's, and I am as a person, and we are as a company crazy about that space. So I think you've covered everything.
Perfect. And I want to talk about the Julian Krinsky camps. But before we do, you said something in an email to me that jumped out as something that I loved. You said you're a serial connector, and I hadn't heard that before, but I want to talk about that because I love this idea. Steve, what is a serial connector?
I'm really passionate about people, meeting people, and connecting with people. It's amazing how when we talk about leadership and mentoring and all the things that even are entrepreneurial, so much of it boils down to who you know, and connecting not for the sake of when you can leverage that relationship, but connecting for the sake of growing, meeting people is something that I'm really passionate about. I'm fortunate to travel quite a bit for personal and for business reasons, and I always look to my network and ask them, do you know anybody in this area I'm going? I'd love to just meet them for a cup of coffee. And sometimes a cup of coffee is just that. It's a cup of coffee and now I know you. And sometimes the cup of coffee is the beginning of a relationship. It feels to me like going to a library and taking out a book. Some books you read, and after you've read it, you have a smile on your face and joy in your heart and you move on. And other books impact you in a profound way. And so connecting for me, I feel, is the same. You just never know who you're going to meet, and I really pay attention to who comes across my path. So connecting, I feel like it makes the world smaller, but also makes it a happier place for me to live in.
And I think it's actually getting more and more important as the world expands. And I mean expanding in the sense that we can now connect with each other. I'm over here in the UK. You're in the United States. You've been over in South Africa. But now we are all connected easily by just turning on the computer. And because of that, I think those who are social connectors, those who really enjoy getting to know people, can really have an advantage, not because you're connecting for an advantage, but because you love to connect, it drives an advantage. So I wanted to ask you this. How do you become a social connector or a serial connector, as you called yourself?
I believe it really begins with passion. and a passion to be with people, to know people and hear their stories. I think there's something, and I don't imply that I'm humble, but there's a humility about meeting people and having an open attitude towards who they are and what they have to say and bring into your life. And I that excites me, and I believe it begins by just being sincerely interested in getting to know people and hearing their story, because everybody's story is so fascinating. When you get past the I'm fine and the weather's good, people's stories just really are amazing. And when I look at my children and I look at the students that come through all our camps and programs on a yearly basis, the world we live in, and you've alluded to it already, Jake, is so different in terms of connecting. There's a book, The World is Flat, and it alludes to the fact that connectivity is everything. And so practicing it, shadowing it so people can see it, and teaching people to do it, I think is such a necessity for tomorrow. You don't just do business across the desk anymore. You do it across nations and oceans these days. And so how do you become it? I think by being mindful and deliberate about meeting, connecting, getting out of your comfort zone if it's not something you do easily. I think that's how you go about doing it. And it's like anything. Once you get your foot in the water, it's not that difficult to get your whole body in the water.
And as we've created this world that's flat, as we talk about, and as we're more connected to more and more people, one thing that I've noticed, and maybe you've seen something similar, maybe not, but I wonder how this serial connecting ties into it. And that is, I think people are becoming more judgmental, and they're making split-second decisions on if they like you or if they don't like you. And oftentimes, once that initial impact, that initial decision is made, well, then it's hard to change it. And I think that's one of the real problems occurring right now, particularly as we sit behind our computers and we don't get out as much, is that we're judging other people before we really get a chance to meet them, before we get past the, hey, how's the weather? What's your name? So how do we take our relationships, knowing that the environment is shifting a little bit towards this judgmental nature? How do we take our relationships to the next level? How do we break down those barriers that other people have? Say I'm a social connector or a serial connector, but I want to, talk to people who maybe aren't that way. How do I bridge that gap?
Well, I love where you're going with that, Jake. It's definitely the world we live in today. I feel like we have so much information at our fingertips, and we are living in an economy in a world where things happen so much quicker. Results are definitely achieved in a quicker way than they have maybe in the past. It's so funny. I have had a tremendous amount of experience in interviewing and teaching students, and not only students, but people, how to go through the interview process. And I haven't practiced it myself very often, but I've definitely been able to teach people about interviewing and or being interviewed. The one thing that you've said that is so true is we make a decision really, really quickly, and it's sometimes very difficult to combat a bad first impression. And so to your point, I feel like the ability to be deliberate about going past the first impression or getting past the first impression stems back to the connecting part, where when you realize that it takes a moment, sometimes a little longer, to get past the how's the weather and to start to get to know somebody, I think that's where people are able to recover from a bad first impression. And I feel like part of the process that the world is in right now, or the stage, call it a phase that we're in, where we're making decisions so quickly, I do think that there comes a time where people understand that superficial connectivity or connections, that superficial judgment will only take you so far. I do believe that if any relationships are going to be sustained and grow, you have to get a little bit deeper. And, in order for you to do that, I feel like you have to get to know someone. There is a movie, Ender's Game. And there's a line in the movie where I won't recall it well, but the young fellow is talking to his sister, I believe, and he's talking about destroying the enemy. And he talks about the amazing thing is, as soon as you get to know your enemy, in order to defeat them, the problem is you actually find out that you love them, because now you really know them. And for me, that's such an amazing thing. And so I don't think I've answered your question, but I guess I'm trying to encourage myself and people who are listening to do is to take the time and be more deliberate about going deeper than just the superficial, because it is judging a book by its cover. It's such an old, wonderful saying, but it's so true in many cases.
And what you said there with the Ender's Game really brought home kind of an idea as this formulates in my mind. I really love this concept of, sometimes we can't help but prejudge people. Sometimes we have formed these judgments. But once you realize that as you get to know people, get to know who they really are deep down, well, then, of course, that's going to all melt away. That barrier is going to break down. So before we jump into the Julian Krinsky and the camps, I want to ask you just one more question about this when it comes to networking and networking events, because I know a lot of listeners to the Modern Leadership Podcast, they're constantly being told, you need to go out and network. You need to go to mixers. You need to go to the community events that they have out there, Rotary or whatever it may be. But when they get there, they don't know what to do. What's a first step maybe that a person struggling with the confidence to go out and be a connector, what's the first step that they can do when they're being invited or asked or told by their superiors that they need to go out and do more networking?
Jake, you're touching on all the difficult topics, aren't you? That I totally hear you, and I believe so many people have that anxiety or just the aversion to being put in those situations. You've got some people that, and I think it's a small part of the population that thrive in those circumstances, but most people would rather run away. For me, I think the one thing that I would love to share is that, when you're in a situation like that, I feel like it's a mentality of much, many, more, come home with a lot of business cards. And I think that puts a whole lot of pressure on. And one of the things I'm really deliberate, and I've said deliberate a few times, but deliberate about trying to do is paying attention to the person in front of me. So what I've seen in those situations is that if it's not a space that you're really good at being in, you're concerned about shaking hands, greeting, and going to the next one. And that's where the anxiety sometimes comes. How do you start a new conversation? How do you move into a group that's already been formed and having a conversation? And I would just say, take the time to pay attention to the person who's in front of you for the time that they're in front of you. If you leave that meeting having connected with one person, connected well, and connecting means well. It doesn't mean just shaking their hands and taking the business card, but connecting in a way that you can write them an email afterwards and say, hi, it was so nice to be with you, to get to know you, and they know who you are. I think that's so much more valuable. So maybe starting with those expectations as opposed to meeting everybody that's in the room and coming home with a Rolodex of business cards and connections, I think that's a much more realistic and honestly a far healthier way of looking at this.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing those things up for us, Steve. And the reason I ask these, what you call tough questions, is because I'm asking the questions that I have in my own heart and my own head these days. Me as a small business owner, I need to get out. I need to network more. And so I ask questions that I think relate back to how I'm growing and developing in the business world. And there's two things that I pulled out from what you said, and I just want to reiterate them because they really hit me as very impactful. The first is this. You said a small percentage of the population really thrive and get excited about going to these networking events. That means the vast majority of people that are going to be at those events are just like you. They're a little bit nervous. They're a little bit shy. They don't quite know who to talk to. And so that should make it a little bit easier to interact and react with people that you're together with that feel similar to you, knowing that they're all nervous. The second thing that I wanted to pull out, and that is you start with just focusing on one person. The goal isn't to collect the most business cards or to meet the most number of people. The goal is to just have one meaningful connection. Once you do that, well, then you can reset your goal. Maybe you need one more. But the goal is to start with one and not feel overwhelmed that you've got to meet every single person in the room. Did I catch all that correctly, Steve?
100%. And I think you phrased it beautifully. A meaningful connection is always going to be more valuable than many connections. And that summarizes, honestly, everything we've been talking to, meaningful connections.
Excellent. Well, now I want to shift over and talk about your primary role, CEO of the Julian Krinsky camps and summer programs, and give us a little background of what this is. I know in the intro I said, we talk about curiosity and passion and skill starting out as a tennis camp, but what is the Julian Krinsky camps and programs?
So Jake, there are a number of things, and I think you told me a little earlier that you were involved in a summer program or a summer camp before. There are a number of different kinds of summer camps and programs that are out there, which is really exciting. You have so many as a parent, as a student, you have so many different choices. The segment of the market that we work in or that we live in is what I guess is referred to as a specialty program. And so when you look at something like tennis or golf or anything that we do from robotics to cooking or medicine or public speaking, architecture, fashion, it doesn't really matter, business, what we do is we give students of all ages, middle school and high school primarily is our target audience, the opportunity to drill down, to experiment, to taste, to try on an experience, to see if this is where they have a passion. And for those that have found a passion, we give them the opportunity to really delve into it and grow. And so Julian Krinsky Camps and Programs runs, I don't really even know the number, and I should, I guess, 20 or more than 20 different style programs. And it's somewhat tailor-made in the sense that what is it that you want to do with your summer? How can we help you experience something that you haven't before? And the beauty of it is that we live on college campuses. So we're at spaces like the University of Pennsylvania, Villanova University, Haverford College. We help a program at Yale. And so we give students from around the world, 40 different countries.
Steve, that's excellent. It sounds like you guys have so much going on. I love this idea that you're finding what these kids are interested in, and then you're specializing in some of the things that they're doing. I'm particularly interested in how you went with the Julian Krinsky camps from a tennis organization to what you're doing now, which covers so much more than that. How was the evolution of the organization from just starting out with maybe one specific emphasis to moving on to what you're doing today?
Well, that's really a fun question. Internally, we love that conversation around that. Julian Krinsky, the founder and the name on the door, played Wimbledon, played French Open, was an incredible tennis player, still is today. So when he came over and him and his business partner, Adrian Castelli, they were both in tennis. And so as they were connecting, spending time with students around tennis, one thing led to another. And Julian realized that they also would love to play golf. And our golf camp started. Next thing, he realized that these athletes were really smart, and Julian has a real passion for business, entrepreneurial business, all sorts of business, and the business camp started. And fast forward, now we have programs in, as I mentioned before, just about anything you can imagine, giving opportunities for students to dabble, try something on, or really focus. So it grew little bit by little bit based on really one thing, listening to our customers. And that's what Julian and Adrian and Tina have always prided themselves in doing. And 40 years, fast forward 40 years, I still think that's what our culture is built around, is listening to our customers and working really hard to try and provide that.
Now, when I was a kid, when I was growing up in my teenage years, I was part of the Boy Scouts of America, and we were a very outdoorsy group. I mean, my age group at the time, and we were all best friends. We loved to go down the river, and we loved to go mountain biking. We loved to go out and be out in the wild. Well, fast forward a few years, now I'm in college, and my dad is still helping out volunteering with the Boy Scouts. And we have this conversation that the attitudes of the youth are changing in that they don't want to be out as much anymore. And so I'm looking at what you just said about 40 years of experience and listening to what the customer needs. And the thought that came into my mind was, well, I'd love to know if you've seen much of a transition in what the kids want and how you deliver it over those years.
Wow, that's a big question. The short answer is yes, there is generally a move away from those traditional outdoor experiences to the more, we'll call it indoor experiences, not necessarily indoor experiences, but maybe away from those. Not because I believe those are bad, and I still believe that those are amazing in terms of just pouring into young people's lives. I feel like what's really changing is the demand on parents and on students to perform. And so what I see the general trend is that when parents look at what downtime their students have, and look, they're still, for the most part, really scheduled. They're still playing tennis and golf, and they're still doing gymnastics and a number of those kinds of things. It's not like they're just sitting at home. When they have a block of time like the American summer offers, parents are looking and saying, I could send them to go canoeing, and there's an immense value to that. But traditionally, that would take up 6 to 8 weeks of the summer. Traditional camps used to do big chunks of time, and they're changing. And now a parent is looking at that, I believe, and saying, that's fine for a week or two because there's just such value in being in nature and doing all those things. It's really an amazing experience. But I also want them to be in a scenario, a situation, an environment where they have the opportunity of growing emotionally, socially, learning. So I'm going to be spending the same kind of money. And I want to use this time wisely, because anything I invest in them, even from a young age, once they get to college, graduate, that's when I will see the return on that investment. So I think people are becoming more mindful of the money they're spending. And I definitely believe they're looking for opportunities to invest in their children outside, things that are maybe more tangible. Going on the lake or hiking up a mountain maybe isn't as tangible as learning how to code. And so I'm not suggesting one is better than the other, but I think it's a little bit easier for parents to quantify what they're spending and try and put a value to it. Did that make sense?
Yeah, and I wonder, do you think it has anything to do with this fear factor that parents have? Are parents becoming more protective of their kids? And the reason I ask this, Steve, and not to put you on the spot here, but I'm a parent of kids this age, and I look at what I allow my kids to do, and I think back, years and years ago when I used to have to walk uphill both ways to school in the snow. You know how that one goes. And I don't let my kids do the same types of things that I did. And I think it's because as parents, we might want to bubble wrap our kids a little bit. We're a little bit more scared for them. And have you seen that, or is this just me?
Jake, it's not just you. It's definitely, I think, a product of the world we live in today. Social media has made every event that happens out there visible to everybody. And so if you look back just, 9/11, a number of things going on around the world, I think there's no doubt, I don't even think, there's no doubt that parents are trying to or are more cautious with what they allow their children to do. I think what I want to encourage is that, you can never change the fact that you want to be there for your child and want to protect them and want them to have the most amazing upbringing in life. But I think there's always a call to balance, and the opportunity for your child to experience things, to fail, to succeed, to be put in situations that maybe you and I were as young children and that kids aren't being exposed to today. I think that there's a real danger in that, in terms of just bringing them up in a way that they're completely sheltered and not really prepared for going out and into the workplace, into even college life. So I totally agree that that's what's happening, and I understand the reasons. And whenever I have the opportunity, I try and call for some balance and say, within reason, you've got to make sure your kids are having experiences and opportunities to discover. And even more important is the opportunity to try something and fail once in a while. We want everybody to succeed. We don't want our kids to fail. But sometimes I believe that's to their detriment.
Yeah, and I feel as a parent that oftentimes I'm looking for opportunities to kind of give my kids that little boost, that little head start that will get them, maybe in front. Maybe it's the competition in me or the need in me to have my kids be successful that is driving me to make certain decisions. And so I appreciate that conversation. And the reason that I wanted to have it is because I heard some statistics recently, and I think that they're not statistics about your organization or summer camps or anything like that, but I think this really plays into what you guys are doing. And so it's really some statistics on college graduation, college debt, and things like that. So 18% of kids that are entering college right now are finishing within 4 years. So when we think about college, right, we think about this 4-year experience. I know growing up, I said, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to spend 4 years. Only 18% of kids entering college today are graduating in 4 years. In fact, the vast majority of kids that are graduating, which by the way is only about half of kids that are entering college, only about half are graduating. The vast majority of them are doing it in the average of 6 years. And you have 33 million Americans right now that have college debt, student loans, but no degree. And the reason that I want to bring this all back and come and get your thoughts on this, being in an organization where you're helping kids develop at this pivotal age, the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I think that we used to look at college as an opportunity to go out and explore new things and find out what you're good at, what you're passionate in, and the direction that you want to go in life. But I think nowadays, because college is so expensive, it's so difficult to get into, and it's taking 6 years to graduate, that experience of finding out what you're interested in and what you want to do with your life needs to happen younger. And I think that's where a camp like Julian Krinsky steps into this role, allowing kids to discover, hey, am I interested in this at 14, 15, 16 versus 19, 20, and 21? Does that make sense?
Oh, so much sense. I think part of what we're excited about, well, first of all, I'm not excited about the statistics you shared, but excited about the opportunity of giving a student the opportunity to test something before. We have so many examples. We had a young girl, mom and dad, both lawyers, did a law internship with us as a rising junior, I believe, going into her senior year at high school. And at the end of it, she said, I don't want to be a lawyer. She had a really successful internship, but it helped her determine that that's what she didn't want to do. Now, that's kind of a negative spin. Most of the stories are really positive, but at least she had the opportunity to discover what she did or didn't want to do. And the idea that we really love is the pre-college experience. Even for our middle school students, they live on our college campus. They get a feel for it. And so getting onto a college when you become a college student, at that point, if you've had the opportunity to do these kinds of things, it's not as foreign, it's not as new, and maybe, because we don't always know, there's just not as much time to settle in. And, the exposing your child to these different experiences, if it's done in a smart way, I personally believe can only be positive and will hopefully turn those figures that you just shared around. It is expensive to go to college. It's a big investment, not only of time, but of money. And so preparing them to choose well what they want to do when they're there, because you still maybe don't know, but at least you might have an idea, but also maybe be more comfortable in that setting. All those things I think are really positive, and we definitely are seeing it at a young age. As I said, even middle school, which is 10 years old for us, 10-year-old students are staying on college campuses and getting a feel for it and really learning to be independent, make choices while we're keeping an eye on them from a little bit of a distance so that they don't feel like they're in some kind of a cage.
And that they're having fun, right? This is their summer break, so they got to have fun. Well, now I want to shift gears just a bit and talk about you personally running this organization and how you hold it all together. And so we talked earlier about you get kids from all over the world. You get kids speaking different languages. You've got different maturity levels. There's a huge maturity difference between a 10-year-old girl and a 16-year-old boy. And I'll let you guess which one's more mature. But how do you keep it all together? How do you oversee such an operation that has so many moving pieces and so many things going on and keep sane?
Well, nobody ever claimed that I was sane, so I won't address that. But what I can talk about is, we have a really good foundation. So the founders that have built a foundation that is just really scalable. And we're a people business. So we're a people business when it comes to our customers. We're a people business when it comes to our teams. And we have a culture of honor. And what that actually boils down to is we believe and we live a culture of honor, which means our customers, we treat them with honor. We want to treat them in a way that is respectful and a way that we believe they want to be treated. And so as we share that with our staff, it goes not only into a cultural concept that we're sharing with them, it then becomes a guide for who and how we hire. So we're always looking for people that can be part of this team. We have a great infrastructure of how we put our teams in place. And we trust our staff to be in place and to perform and to operate in a way that they need to. With these students from everywhere, there's, it's like having a few thousand students sleep over at your house. Somebody's always awake. Somebody's got a fever. Somebody's hungry. Somebody can't sleep. And so over the years, we've helped train our staff or figured out how to train our staff in a way that we make them feel as at home as possible. You deal with the ups and downs of I'm hungry, I can't sleep. But what really at the end of the day boils down to is if we put people with the right attitude in place in terms of staffing, we are more than 50% of the way there, because attitude goes such a long way, an attitude of wanting to ensure that the people that are coming from 40 different countries and 40 different states, when they're here, they're excited and having an amazing time. And when the staff have that in their minds and have that as an attitude, the delivery of everything that we do at such an amazingly high level is not as complicated or difficult as it might seem.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I think attitude is so vitally important, and it really is the difference maker. Now, Steve, you make it sound so easy. I told you that in the past had worked for an organization that we did summer camps. And I'll tell you, in the summer, throughout the year, we had 30 professional staff that were on the payroll all year long. In the summer, that group would swell to over 100 people. We would basically triple, quadruple our staff size, but it would only be for 6 to 8 weeks. And so I would imagine that you guys have similar. You have a core group of people that work throughout the year, but then in the summer when these camps are actually happening, they swell to a larger group. And how do you take people who are seasonal and motivate them, inspire them, and also not just motivate and inspire, but also train them so that the brand stays consistent year after year and everyone gets a good quality experience?
Well, you've certainly experienced some of it, Jake, just listening to the tale you've just told. So we're in a similar position. For us, it begins with the 35 or so people that we have in a full-time capacity, really believing who we are and living who we are, living not only our culture, but being transparent with one another and being honest with one another. And that's something that we really value in the organization. Now, being honest with one another can be really hard. So being honest and delivering that information in a way that is easy to receive is also really important. And so what we really do, I think, is practice that on a day-to-day basis with our full-time staff. When it comes time to ramp up to the summer, we're probably close to 400 or 500 staff. It varies a little bit during the summer. That core group is responsible for continuing. I have a friend that talks about a red strawberry. He said to me, "Why is a red strawberry red?" So I said, "I don't know." I don't know if it was a joke or a trick question. He said, "So that the green strawberries know what it looks like when their job is done, or what they're supposed to look like." And so our full-time staff are the red strawberries, and what they do is they model behaviors and attitudes. And obviously, we spend a week in training our staff once we bring them together every year. They model that behavior. They model the attitudes, and it's amazing. People generally want to do what you want them to do. They generally want to please. So if you are deliberate in sharing with them what you want, what your expectations are, and if you're honest with them when they're not meeting those, most people are really open to that. And so our core staff are the ones that are modeling the behavior, and it's not as difficult to train as you would imagine. Obviously, we have smaller groups as well, so it's not just the whole group of 400 or 500 that we're training it in one place.
I love that. Attitude is contagious. And I love that story about the strawberry because it really makes crystal clear sense to us. If you have your key core staff, and I'm talking to the audience out here that's listening to us, as they have their people that are on board, as you're bringing on new people, bringing on new employees, bringing on new followers as a leader, if you have your bright red strawberries that are leading the way and showing people what it looks like to be performing at a peak level, well, then the rest of the group will follow in line because attitude is contagious and that example can permeate throughout the whole group. Now, on the flip side, if you get someone at that top level that's got the wrong attitude, well, then it all goes down from there as well, doesn't it?
Indeed. And that's why I was talking about being transparent and being honest with one another. And so, we all have stressful moments and we all have, ups and downs, what we refer to as our 10%. So if I had to ask my wife, what would you want me to change? There's what we in our business call the 10%. So if I look at any one person, 90% of who they are and what they do is amazing. And there's 10% I want to change. And the number is not the real number. It's just a concept. And so, please, if you wouldn't do this and if you didn't do this, being able to speak to somebody about what that 10% looks like, feels like, is, and helping them, holding them accountable to address that 10%, should I say, it is really effective. Sometimes people don't understand or don't know. Now, if you have somebody who's really not in the right place, part of being a culture of honor is having an honest conversation and figuring out how to transition them out of that role. And we would do that. We would have a conversation with someone, either transition them out over a period of time so that, but it would follow a conversation that was really honest and was intended to honor them and get them to a place where they needed to be. For me, I feel like even the person with a bad attitude, attitude is a choice. Another friend I have talks about it's just a focus away. So what you focus on gets bigger. So if you're focusing on something negative, it gets bigger. But a good attitude is just one focus away. So often when you sit with somebody, even if they're not performing great, and you have a conversation and you can articulate the things that you believe are not as they should be, most people can make those changes. Unfortunately, over the years, there have been one or two people that were on the wrong bus, as it were. Good to great analogy. And, then we are really honorable about trying to phase them out or give them an opportunity to transition into some different kind of a role. And it's worked okay for us. You can't bat 100 for your whole life. But for the most part, we're pretty close.
Well, and anytime we can have a Jim Collins reference on the podcast, we know we're going down the right street, things are going well. And, Steve, it would really surprise me if you were to say, I've got 400 people coming on my team every year, and we've never had somebody that was on the wrong bus or somebody that was sitting in the wrong seat on the bus. That would surprise me. Now, I love this 90-10 principle. Pareto's law, as you've heard, relates to everything, and it even relates to people and their weaknesses and their strengths. And when you look at an individual and you say, look, 90% of what you got is strong, what can we do to make those strengths really shine? What can we do to really make that your PowerPoint as you work? And as you do that, well, people fall into their nice routine that's working well for them. They're happy. And then that translates into this attitude. And then, of course, from there, it's all the dominoes that knock down. So great discussion. I love talking about the Pareto principle, the 90-10. And on that, I wanted to ask you about the off season now. So you go through this big ramp up, you get really excited, you go through 6, 8, 9, 10, I don't know how many weeks you guys run all summer with the different school schedules. You probably have quite a long summer session, and then all of a sudden it's over. How do you stay motivated in the off season?
It's funny. It's a question we get asked so often. People that aren't in the industry would imagine that's when we go to the beach, kick back, and work on our suntans and read books and catch up on email. One of the things I love and about who we are and what we do is that we have a really seasonal business. The summer, self-explanatory. Between September and December is when we are busy putting together the pieces of what we need to do for the new year. And that means new programming, reviewing curriculums. We're always adding new opportunities to what we offer in all sorts of realms. And keep an eye on our website and you'll see how new things pop up every single year. Again, listening to our customers. And so that's our season to update the website, make sure our marketing schedules are all right, look through our literature, connect with families to evaluate how the experiences were with us. And it's a real spring cleaning time in fall. So it's the fall here, but we take that opportunity to spring clean not only our minds, but our offerings and get ready for the next season. From January through call it May is a season where we're connecting with families around the world. We're connecting with agents around the world. We're speaking to people and telling them about these different opportunities and seeing if this is a good fit for them. And so it is so seasonal that it feels like we are always busy, but a different kind of busy. And being busy in a different way, for me anyway, keeps me fresh and motivated. So our season is never dead. There's always something going on. It's fascinating. The summer is just a little bit more hectic because we have so many people sleeping over at our house.
And I think that this is a great way to think about it because in a lot of our jobs, we work day after day. It's the same thing. I spent a number of years working in the finance industry, working for a stockbroker. I spent a year doing that. And every day it was wake up, it was do the same thing. Whereas when you get into these seasonal type of roles, it's not that you're any less busy. You've got a lot of responsibilities all year round, but you're able to put a bow around it and move on to the next one, which I think is kind of fascinating. And it really tells there are certain personalities that should look for jobs in these types of arenas, because they can get ramped up, they can get excited, and then they can put a bow on it, move on to the next one, and versus getting stuck in the monotony. And so if you're that type of person, you may want to look at these types of roles, working in a camp culture or a seasonal culture like that.
I couldn't agree more. And the nice thing is it's not only time spent working on the presentation, the summer, the opportunities for each summer. during the off season is where we get to invest in our full-time staff as well. So I agree with you. There's an opportunity where we invest in who we are, and then there's an opportunity, or a time, should I say, where we get an opportunity to deliver that to families and friends from around the world. And yeah, there's definitely a personality that this suits well. If I had to just try and summarize it, it would be an upbeat personality and someone who's excited about doing multiple things, because as you well would remember from your days back then, you do end up wearing many, many different hats.
And that skill to wear different hats is so needed, I think, in today's culture and today's work environment, because those who can adapt and adjust, those who have innovative thinking, those who can think outside the box are always going to be in demand. When it comes to job security, that is the ultimate job security. I was reading today, and I think this relates back into working in this environment. I was reading today about Hollywood and about the life cycle of a movie, where you have the writers that come in and they put together this movie that they're going to write. And then they go out and they get the actors, and then the actors learn the roles, and then they design the set, and then they film it, and then they edit it, and then it goes into post-production, and then it goes into marketing, and then eventually it ends up on our doorstep, or it ends up at the movie theater. And I think that's really what we need to look at when it comes to like some of these roles, Julian Krinsky camps being one of them, where you've got these different positions that are happening all throughout the year, and it's the delivery that arrives at your door during the summer, but it's the experience that you put in or the exercises that you work throughout the year that makes that such a wonderful movie when it comes down to it. And so I'm very excited about everything you've got there. We only have a few more minutes, Steve, and before we close out my favorite part of the podcast, I love to chat with leaders about a few things, get to know them a little bit more on a personal level. I call it learning from leaders, and it's just a bunch of rapid fire questions to kind of get to know you a little bit. You want to jump into that?
Oh, very excited to.
Book currently on your Kindle or bedside table?
There are multiple. I guess the two that I'm busy reading most is The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. I'm also deep into How We Decide by Jonah Lehrer.
I have not heard of the second one, but the first one has been recommended before just last week. As a matter of fact, very interesting that it comes up kind of in cycles. Some of these books pop up over and over. The Greatest Salesman in the World, Og Mandino. How about best movie ever made?
Oh, The Matrix. Absolutely.
Matrix 1 or Matrix 1 through 3?
No, just one, unfortunately.
I am a big fan of The Matrix as well myself. And I think there are a ton of business lessons and leadership principles that are throughout that whole movie. It's just very fascinating. I love it myself. How about your leadership superpower?
I would say it's inspirational and passion. I'm not sure exactly which words are the right ones, but definitely inspirational.
How about a motivational quote, mantra, or philosophy?
So I love this. It's been something I've been passionate about for a long time. Zig Ziglar said, your attitude, not your aptitude, determines your altitude. And I really live by that.
And we are huge fans of Zig Ziglar on this podcast. As you probably know, being a listener, I quote him almost every episode. If you could leave just one leadership trait to your kids or the next generation, what would it be?
I think passion, I just feel like passion is the driver. If I get up and I'm passionate about who I am and what I'm doing, the attitude I bring to it and the way I approach it is totally going to be different than if it's not. So I'm very passionate about everything in my life. And so that's what I would probably want to say.
And we've talked on this podcast quite a bit about attitude today. And another Zig Ziglar quote would be, attitude is catching. Make sure yours is worth catching.
Right.
And then finally, best book ever written.
So there's so many good books, right? The one I love, and I hope you've read it, is by Bill Bryson, A Short History of Nearly Everything. Love how it was written, and the content is spectacularly well researched and well delivered.
So I have not read it. So why don't you give me an idea?
Bill Bryson is just a phenomenal author. I adore how he writes and shares his information, but he goes from the creation of the universe and he fast forwards through almost everything. And I don't want to do an injustice to the book. You should absolutely read it. The stories he tells along the way about everything that you can imagine in terms of things that were invented, things that were discovered, is just wonderful. I must have read it 7 times already.
And the reason that I always ask this question when I get people on the podcast is there are so many books out there. I mean, you can go on Amazon and spend a lifetime just searching through the books, but they're not all good. So I always want to ask people what their best book they ever read was, because I want to pick it up and I want to read it. And this is definitely shot up on my list of books that I'm interested in, having not read it. So I really appreciate, Steve, you sharing that one with us. Very exciting. Before I let you go, can you offer us any last bit of advice? And then, of course, tell us how we can find out more about you or about the Julian Krinsky camps and how we can get involved.
Last bit of advice. I don't think it's ever too late to start again. And if you are not crazy passionate, and crazy in a good way, about who you are or where you are right now, it is never too late to make a change. And I absolutely believe you can find a place where your passion is used. And so my encouragement would just be, don't settle for something that isn't what you're passionate about. Really, don't settle. If you're 40, 50, 60, you can still make a change in your life, and I encourage you to do that. You can find us at www.jkcp.com, and it's /ML for Modern Leadership. We have a discount for anybody who'd like to attend one of our business programs, or you can see any of our programs there. And there's also a link to an article I wrote recently around culture, so that might be interesting to some.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll have that linked up on the website. It's jkcp.com/ML for Modern Leadership. And there we can get an article that you just was just recently written. And I got to tell the listener, you got to go on this website and check out all that they have to offer. We only glanced the very tip of the iceberg of what's going on at the Julian Krinsky camps over the summer. We talked about golf. We talked about tennis. We talked a little bit about business. But the one that has me most excited as I look at my daughter and what she's interested in is this advanced coding class where the kids get together and code and learn over a couple of weeks and find out if this is really something that they can do. I saw that there was an app creation class, just so many great things going on. So a high recommendation to go over. I'm going to link it up on the show notes for this episode, and take a chance and just see what Julian Krinsky is all about. They're doing some fantastic stuff. Steve, I can't thank you enough for your time today and being a part of the Modern Leadership podcast. You are truly a modern leader.
Jake, it was such fun chatting with you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, my friends, and thank you. Another huge thanks to Steve Robertson for being a guest on the Modern Leadership Podcast. Had such a great time talking with him. I hope that you could tell how interested I am in this type of information. I just love what they're doing out of the Julian Krinsky camps. And I just thought Steve was one of the most genuine guests that we've had on the podcast. I just loved his attitude, his helpful nature, his quotes, the things that he directed us towards, the lessons that we learned from him. Sure appreciate him coming on. As I do every week, I love to break it down and give you a couple of my biggest takeaways. First big takeaway, attitude is contagious. Attitude is that very beginning domino that knocks all the rest of them down. If you've got the right attitude and everything starts going your way, you got the wrong attitude and everything starts going against you. And so, huge point to note there. I loved as we talked about the culture of honor. Are you building within your organization a culture of honor where people feel proud to be a part of your organization, where people want to do what's best for your organization because they believe in your mission, your cause, and what you're doing? Is there transparency? These are a couple of the things that I love that we talked about. And finally, it's never too late to start again. You know, Colonel Sanders didn't get going until after he had retired and realized his Social Security was too small. There are opportunities at any age and any time and station in life. You just got to go out there and take them. Go out and grab them. And so with that, I want to leave you for this week. Thank you for being a part of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Until next week, I want to wish you a great day. Stay motivated, have a right attitude, and of course, I'll see you next week. Stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.